Welcome to the first step in solving a future problem solver challenge. So step one is going to begin with the students analyzing the future scene. Future scenes can take many different forms. Sometimes they're in a journal format, other times they might be in a newspaper format, and then we have one like we do today in which it's kind of in a format of a report that has been made. When the students get the future scene, they're going to be asked to read it aloud as a group, preferably reading for comprehension first, having a conversation about what's happening, when it's happening, where it's happening, and then just having a conversation about what some of the challenges they hear are, and then talking about what those could lead to in terms of future challenges. After they've read it through one time and talked about it, then each student is going to grab their highlighter and they are going to go through the future scene one more time and highlight the challenges that they see. So in this case, this future scene is two sides, and it may look something like this after they've highlighted their challenges. This future scene happens to be on the easier side, in that this report has outlined all of the challenges for them. Typically, the future scenes are not this straightforward, and students need to read a little bit deeper into the future scene in order to understand what the challenges are and what they could lead to. So I've gone ahead and highlighted some of the challenges in this, and please remember you can find this hard copy on our blog that you can go ahead and print off for yourself if this is something that you wanted to walk through as you watch this video. And that site is thebrumleybunch.blogspot.com, and we'll put that on this video. So I have taken the time to highlight some of the challenges on the front and on the back. Now, not every student can write a challenge statement, which is this first step, writing challenges. They can't all write challenge statements that are all the same. So again, they have to have a conversation about what challenges they're going to write so they don't duplicate them. When you're writing challenges, there are a few essentials that the students need to keep in mind. The first one is they have to be finding facts from the future scene. We do a lot of research around the topic, but they can't recall anything that they've learned. They have to recall only the things from the future scene that they see. So if they happen to recall a fact from some of their research and it's not in the future scene, they can't necessarily use it as a challenge. They may be able to use it later in the packet as a solution or something like that, but they have to include only the facts from what they've read. After they have found a fact, then they have to explain what the challenge is, why that fact is a challenge. If they can incorporate some topic vocabulary, that would be fantastic. It gets them a few extra points. And then they need to detail any effects that result from the fact. They need to explain why that effect is a challenge. And they need to avoid extremes and absolutes. So in other words, they need to use words in their statements such as such as might or may, and not use words such as will. They really need to make sure that they understand that while these are challenges for some, they may not be challenges for others. So they want to avoid those absolute terms. What I like to have the students do is start with a piece of paper that looks like this, that's broken up into the same 5 sections that we just saw on the Challenge Writing Essentials page. Here it's just a nice way to outline the fact from the future scene, and then they can talk about cause and effect. How does that lead to the challenge? How does that lead to an effect that relates to the fact? Then they have to explain why it's a challenge, and then they also have to try to tie it to one of the categories. In addition to incorporating vocabulary words, they also need to try to make their challenges broad in terms of what category it may be an issue for. Here are categories lists. We have 18 different categories, And students need to try to be creative as possible in determining, is their challenge going to be a communication issue? Is the challenge going to lead to an economic issue, a recreation issue? Perhaps it'll be a social relationship issue. What I like to do with this page is have them identify the fact first, then determine what category that perhaps they haven't used yet. So let's say they've already written 5 challenges and all those challenges happen to be under the category of education, which is one of their 18. Well, so far they haven't been very flexible with their categories, and so the group might say, wow, we have 5 educational categories, which means we have 5 educational challenges. We need to start being more flexible with the categories we choose. So they might take a look at this category list and they might say, we have 17 more to pick from. So let's see if we can make this challenge that we find in the future scene. Let's see if we can tie it to an environmental challenge, or if we can tie it to a social relationship issue. Once they fill this out, it may look something like this. So the first thing they would do is identify the fact from the future scene. Children in America who grow up in poverty may not be able to afford school supplies. That came directly out of the future scene that they read. And so that one's pretty cut and dry. And then it's just a series of cause and effect relationships after that. What I recommend to the students once they become more comfortable with this process is before they do the challenge, the effects, and the explanation, is to take a look at that category list, find out what they do and do not have already represented, and see if they can kind of make it fit into the category. And so this is a category, if it is education, I would try to make it fit. So they could fall behind in their schoolwork, that's education related. It may cause these children to fall behind more affluent children in their academic learning, and as a result, the gap between rich and poor students may increase. This is clearly an educational category because each of these deals with the student's education. Notice that this word affluent is underlined. For this topic of educational disparities, affluent was one of our vocabulary words. If they can get these vocabulary words into their own thinking, they get those flexibility points. If the vocabulary word happens to show up in the fact, it is my understanding that they would not get those points for using that word because it wasn't their own use of it. Here's one more example of how they could use this. So here we have African American males are 3 times more likely to get suspended from preschool than their white American male counterparts. So in the example we saw before, it was an education category. I want to try to not repeat a category if at all possible, although that is very difficult. But in this case, maybe I have a conversation with my group before I write anything down in regard to what could possibly happen as a result of one group of students being punished 3 times more often than another group of students. And maybe my group decides that it could lead to emotional issues. And so we might decide before we write anything down that this could be a psychological health category issue. Going from that, now I fill in these other 3, always keeping in mind that my end result should tie to psychological health. So we've come up with this could lead to white students thinking they are better than African American students. As a result, white students could say things that may emotionally hurt the African American students, which may cause the African American students to become depressed. So being depressed would be a psychological health issue. And then again, please note the non-absolute words, the coulds, mays, okay, and nowhere in these will you see will. Okay, we also don't use things that lead to final results, such as death. Okay, if there was a war-torn country, we would say that in this case, students may become severely injured. We would not say they would die in any way. So we don't want to have words that are final. All right, once they've done, this is just one example of what they could do. Once they have written their full paragraph, they should decide or they should go back through on their scratch paper and they should try to highlight all of the required areas. If they can use a highlighter, such as what I've done here, and I've used different colors. Let's say I've highlighted the fact in yellow, I've told what the challenge is in orange, I've detailed the effects in pink, and then in green I've explained why it is a challenge. Once they have written their final statement, while they're practicing, they couldn't do this on the actual write-up, but while they're practicing learning how to write challenges, they should get those same 4 colors. And if they can highlight within the paragraph those 4 areas using their 4 colors, then they can be pretty confident that the statement they have written is a complete challenge statement. So in this case, I want to highlight the fact from the future scene in yellow. And that would be this: because children in America who grow up in poverty may not be able to afford school supplies. Notice I had to change the words a little bit. I started with the word because, and then I'm just using my transition as a comma. Okay, the next one I'm going to look for is, what would the challenge be that comes from that fact? Well, they could fall behind in their schoolwork. So that would be what my challenge is. The next thing I would highlight are the effects resulting from the fact. So if this is my fact and this is a challenge, what might happen as a result of that challenge? What might happen as a result of them falling behind in their schoolwork? So in my pink highlighter, I would say this may result in these children falling behind more affluent children in their academic learning. So you can see it's a direct cause and effect relationship. If you fall behind in your schoolwork, that could result in you falling behind more affluent children in your academic learning, because remember, these students facing this challenge are growing up in poverty. So it's a direct connection between all 3 of these. Also note again the use of the vocabulary word. The final piece to writing a challenge is explaining why this pink here, why this effect resulting from the fact is a challenge. And in this case, as a result, the gap between rich and poor students may increase. So essentially what we've got are challenge statements coming from the future scene. In order to be successful with these, students have to have a conversation with their group. They have to know what are all the pieces that are required. They have to know who is writing a challenge on what statement, because they do not want to write duplicate statements. They can use the same fact multiple times in their 16 challenge statements that they write up in their packet, but they need to make sure that that is the only thing that is duplicated. In other words, if I wanted to write this fact, my partner, somebody else in my table group, could also start with this same fact, but they would not be able to tie it to anything about affluent children and the gap that may result between those in poverty and those who are not. They would have to take it a completely different direction. And so if they ran out of challenges in the future scene and they needed to start using these and doubling them up, that is when this category list would come in to play. One of the ways it could come into play. They could say, all right, well, let's take a spin on this for physical health or law and justice or social relationships. So this is step 1. Step 2 will have us taking one of our 16 challenges and applying that to a more specific statement, in which then we will try to solve it by creating solutions. So the next video will have us looking at one of these statements and writing a more specific statement about how we could plan to solve the problem that these students in this case might be facing and how we would plan on helping them. All right, thank you.